yesterday, and we were talking about the Spanish-American War, most lopsided war in American history. We talked a little bit about the role that this gentleman played in it. Who is that? Theodore Roosevelt, who was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy until he made a bold decision and led to his resignation. But then he formed a militia, really, of his own. And what were they called? The Rough Riders, who fought a lot in Cuba, and ultimately led to him becoming a national celebrity. He'd already been like the governor of New York and a delegate, so I mean he had some popularity. And it wins him. He becomes McKinley's vice president in his second term. And then the rest is history, so to say. And we'll talk a lot more about Roosevelt after we finish the Spanish-American War. But, we said that there was fighting going on in the Philippines. There was fighting, most of the fighting was going on in Cuba. There's also another island which was taken by the United States called Guam. You ever heard of Guam? It's part of America today. It's a territory. It's not a state or anything. But Guam fell to the United States 2 weeks after Manila. You want to know how it was captured? A single American cruiser came by, got parked in the harbor, got off the boat, then went and talked to the governor of Guam. An executive officer, a few Marines, and a handful of reporters go to talk to the governor. The governor of Guam surrendered to a reporter. He didn't even know he was a military guy. He was a reporter. So Guam was taken over by like 9 soldiers and 16 reporters. Needless to say, it was a bloodless overtaking. Guam. Look how nice and peaceful that picture is. Just one boat, just chilling. All right. But obviously, as we mentioned, the war in Cuba is what that is supposed to say, was much different. That's what main action was. We talked about the Congress declaring war, and they went back and forth until ultimately, when was war declared for us? Yeah, July 3rd, 1776. But, Cuba was a problem. They weren't going to simply surrender just as they did in Guam. And our staging area, we mentioned yesterday, was like Orlando is a little more inland. Tampa is actually where they left from, but ultimately is all very much right there. So, the U.S. Army itself was very small. The Army was small and weak. We had a good Navy. We had modern ships, but we didn't have a bunch of them. But ships we did have were good. But our Army was small and weak. And, we're calling up all these soldiers to go fight. We didn't really even have any weapons to, use. So they're training the, new recruits with brooms. They're, handing them brooms and, teaching them how to march and stuff with a broom, not even a real weapon. So, we didn't have a lot of ships. We contacted Dole and used their banana boats to get troops to Cuba from Florida. And all this sounds really bad. Spain was even worse. Spain was in even worse shape. All in all, about 60,000 soldiers made it to Cuba in 1898. And the fighting lasted about a week. We talked about the turning point was Teddy Roosevelt leading a heroic charge up San Juan Hill. Very lopsided. So now the Spanish didn't really have any fleet left. They didn't have any navy left. And their objectives were very limited. And ultimately, Spain surrenders. There's the Roosevelt, San Juan Hill. And Spain ultimately surrenders. And the terms of surrender were negotiated. Does anybody know where? Unfortunately, it's another Treaty of Paris. Yeah. Paris is nice. Everybody wants to go there. Hash out some peace. So, Treaty of Paris, December 10th, 1898. I put the date to help you keep them all straight. All right? Yeah. All right, so this is an actual photograph taken. Pretty cool. I like to see pictures. We're in an era now where we get actual pictures, not just like paintings.
Like paintings
Yeah.
and like the myth of
Yeah, so that's cool. That's cool. All right, but this is what essentially the Treaty of Paris is going to do. All right, Cuba, what I'm going to say is not really going to match up with the order there, but Cuba will be given to the United States as a protectorate. The heck's a protectorate? Basically, it's kind of like the way Puerto Rico and Guam is to us today. It's our territory, but we can, we use it. They have to answer to us. Now, the United States would allow Cuba to have its own government, so they can rule themselves within, but all foreign affairs would be handled by the United States government. The Philippines would become what is called an administrative dependency. Administrative dependency. A little bit more control by the United States in the Philippines, as the politics, government, and foreign affairs would be handled by the U.S.
Wait, it was given to us as a what?
As an administrative dependency. You know what I think administrative dependency is a big fancy word for? Colony. That doesn't sound very American, does it? America is in control of a colony. Doesn't that kind of like defeat our purpose?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Didn't we already fight this war? So, also Puerto Rico would become an administrative dependency along with Guam. We still have those. We don't have Cuba anymore.
Wow.
Because they had a revolution in the 1950s, and a communist by the name of Fidel Castro took control. All right. So, what are we now after this Treaty of Paris? What is the nature of our government in the world? We are an empire. Are we not? We have territory in Asia, in the Caribbean. Alaska's a state. Yeah, I think no, not for another 50 years. Actually, it's not a state yet. So we're an empire.
What do we have in Asia?
The Philippines.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, where in the Philippines at? I thought they were like
Geography. So bad. So bad.
These green islands right here.
Oh, I thought they were like beside Hawaii.
Hawaii.
I thought they were, like with Guam and stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
I thought they were like under Hawaii.
I mean, they're closer to Hawaii than we are, but they're still not really close to
Yeah, I
Hawaii.
thought the Philippines was
You
like
got
right
Hawaii
there.
here, Philippines here.
Make it round.
So it's probably still like 4,000 miles from there.
Yeah, I thought they were like right in there near Florida.
The Philippines? No, man, they're like near China. Yeah, like
I
here.
thought they were near Florida too.
Vietnam is right
Like-
here, China, Japan. It's in
And
Asia.
it's just mapped.
Straight up in Asia, okay? All right, so, but I understand why you might think that, because what language do a lot of people in the Philippines speak?
Spanish.
Spanish,
Yeah.
because they've been controlled by the Spanish for a long, long time. So a lot of Filipino people speak Spanish, which is, it's the nature of how they were administratively occupied. So the people of the Philippines trade the yoke of one empire for another. Anybody upset about that? Who? You remember that dude, Emilio Aguinaldo? Remember he was promised by Admiral Dewey? He's like, hey, if you help us, then we'll give you independence. That didn't happen.
They got American independence.
Well, no, they didn't get any independence. They just replaced Spanish rule with American rule. Think he's just gonna be like, okay, that's cool. Go America. Where's my red, white, and blue underwear? No, not gonna like that. But as you can see, it's like this is I guess some political cartoons here. It says, well, I hardly know which to take first because you got the Philippines, you got Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico.
What's the pig?
It would be like how you're gonna carve up the Philippines and stuff. All right, so you got Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam always represents the American government, and who's serving him? That's President McKinley. Okay, so he doesn't know which to take first. All right, another political This is a political cartoon showing America becoming an empire, and then here's another one. We start out. Look at this little baby Uncle Sam, small, weak, get a little stronger. Through our hard work. That's what the axe is going to represent. Then we gain our independence through war, by the patriot here, Patriot Uncle Sam. Get a little older, a little stronger, but by the time after the Spanish-American War, check out Uncle Sam here. Got a warship under his arm, big old belly, and what do you think the size of Uncle Sam is representing here? Power and authority of the United States on a global scale. Got another one. The eagle obviously represents the United States, and he's standing with one foot in America, another foot. Where's that foot at?
In Mexico.
In Cuba.
Yeah.
And then where's he stretching to? The Philippines. I wonder what this wing's looking at. It's kind of going down towards South America. Remember that Monroe Doctrine? It starts to get used hard and heavy after this one, after the Spanish-American War. Okay? So, but the Philippines, obviously, they're not going to be too pleased about the actions of the United States of America as they fight back. And it is an ugly, ugly scene. You've probably never heard of this, but another war is fought in the Philippines between the Philippine people and the United States of America. You know why you don't hear about it much? Because it makes us look really bad. Like we're worse than Britain was to us. All right? It's called the Filipino insurrection. The Philippines were basically an American colony. And this was an idea that was supported by progressives. We need to be involved in the global scheme. Everybody else is an empire. Why can't we be an empire? But, after a 4-year fight in the Philippines where Emilio Aguinaldo has basically guerrilla warfare against the American troops in the Philippines, and stories come back about Filipino people being tortured by American troops and American troops dying. That's never been a popular thing. Boys dying, all to try to keep control of a place that's thousands of miles away. And Aguinaldo is making it even more and more difficult. All because, what did Aguinaldo want? Freedom. He's fighting for freedom. How do you think that plays out in the newspapers? America using military rule to crush a people who want freedom and independence. It doesn't play very well. So the Philippines were ultimately defeated by America and stayed an American colony until 1942. So for 50 years. But over time, when the Philippines were fighting, Americans began to change their ideas about having an empire. It was a progressive idea, but it kind of sours in American brains, the idea of an empire. Didn't we? And this is kind of how it all began for us. So The United States had to invent a way to get rid of empire. And that sets the stage for one of my favorite presidents of all time. Look at that guy. Doesn't he just look like a happy man? Like a guy you just want to talk to. Yeah. That's Teddy Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt. He's a fascinating dude, y'all. He becomes president not by winning an election, but because William McKinley was assassinated. And Teddy Roosevelt was his vice president. So McKinley, he was assassinated, I believe, let me see if we got a picture of it. Yeah, he was assassinated in Buffalo, and he doesn't die immediately. He actually doesn't die of gunshot wound. He dies of gangrene. Yeah, he lingers on. Leon Schultz is how he was an anarchist, and he murders the president, thereby making Teddy Roosevelt the president on September 23rd, 1901. Is when not when McKinley's shot, but when TR takes the reins of government. September 23rd, 1901. Now, President Roosevelt is a president of firsts. He's like the first president to do it, like everything, it seems. He is the first president to be known by just his initials, TR. Yeah, now I referred to like TJ, but nobody called Thomas Jefferson TJ. But people would be like, hey, TR, and they would be referring to Teddy Roosevelt. He is the first to leave the...
Tony Sever, you need to report to the...
I don't know. Seemed pretty unprofessional. All right, he was the first president to leave the country while in office, to go outside of the borders of the United States while he was president. He's the first to do that. It's kind of hard to believe that no one else had done that. You know, our president leaves all the time. It's kind of a common thing. But he was the first. First president to ever go down in a submarine. They'd existed since the Civil War, poorly, but he's the first to do it. He's the first president to send a telegraph for the purposes of diplomacy across the Atlantic Ocean to try to smooth things over. He is the first president to win a Nobel Peace Prize. That's a big deal. First president to own a car, as they were kind of mass-produced during his presidency. First president to dine with an African American in the White House. The youngest president, even to this day, 42. So, a lot of firsts. So let's talk about some of these big firsts here, like this one. The man he invited to dine with him was Booker T. Washington. You know Booker T. Washington, right? Yeah, we've talked about him. He invited Booker T. Washington to dine with him at the White House for dinner. And as you might imagine, he had doubts about doing it politically. Why? Because most of America were racist. And when he thought about that, it turned his stomach so much that he said, I would be ashamed of myself for not doing it. So he invites Booker T. Washington, and they have dinner together. And of course, what happens to Teddy Roosevelt? He's completely ridiculed in every newspaper in America, particularly where? In the South. In the South. Now, what they discussed was, Washington wanted to see the rights of African Americans protected. And Roosevelt wanted African Americans to vote for him in the upcoming presidential election. So he has dinner with him in the presence of his wife and his teenage daughter, Alice. And it is an absolute firestorm in the media, particularly in the South, where it's like this guy, Bill Tillman, says, like, he's a senator, a United States senator. He says some of the most horrible things that I'm not even going to repeat. But it's like you would not believe that a senator would be saying these things, and that's being published in a newspaper, and people are like, yeah, like absolutely horrendous things, okay? Just talks about how blacks and whites are not equal, and he talks about how because Roosevelt had dinner with him, that this will necessitate the killing of several black people. Like he incites white people to go kill black people just because of this, okay? So, like, I think he even calls for like 1,000 people to be killed, like in a newspaper, just because they had dinner together with his family, all right? So, Teddy Roosevelt did it. He did it. He faced the consequences head on. He said, even if it costs me my whole political career, I'm going to do it. And he was always a champion for doing what was right. Now, that being said, he never did it again, but he is the first president to do it. He was a moralist, first, last, and always. So he understood what he needed to do. Okay, so that's an important part of Teddy Roosevelt. Now, he also, so he's doing things like that. He's also taking on big business. I don't know why my captions are all messed up, but this is who? J.P. Morgan, and this is going to represent who? Teddy Roosevelt. He's got a big stick. That's a quote by him. Speak softly and carry a big stick. That's a quote by Teddy Roosevelt. What's he going to use this big stick, do you think, if I got a picture of J.P. Morgan here? He's one of those robber barons, captain of industry. Yeah, robber baron's the negative term. Captain of industry sounds a little more positive. Do you think he's going to take him on? All right. When Teddy Roosevelt became president, industry and profits in America had never been greater. But only a few men had control of all that wealth. Those men dictated prices, wages, working conditions. Everything in Americans were dealt. So, they were taught, like, they controlled the price of things like coal, whiskey, peaches, lamp oil, everything, consumer goods. And any small business that tried to compete with them, they destroyed immediately. So enter J.P. Morgan, a super wealthy banker, and he spoke for most of those trusts because he held a lot of their money in his bank. And he didn't think that he owed anybody anything. Owed the public nothing is actually one of his quotes. And Teddy Roosevelt intended to hold the rich people in the world to the same levels of accountability as the poor. So early in Teddy Roosevelt's first few weeks or months as presidency, as being president, he orders the Justice Department to file a lawsuit against J.P. Morgan's organization, calling it a trust. So he's going to try to use that Sherman antitrust law to break up the trust. Now, the name of the J.P. Morgan's company was Northern Securities Company, and the goal of this particular company was to gain a monopolistic control of every railroad between the Pacific Ocean and the Great Lakes. So, like all of the northwestern and western part of America would be under the control of this, all the railroads would be under the control of this one company. That's a monopoly, okay? And monopolies are illegal. So when J.P. Morgan gets word of this lawsuit, he's like, what's up with this? Who's this guy think he is? So he goes to the White House and he visits Teddy Roosevelt, and he's like, hey, if we have a problem, why don't we just, you send your guy, I send my guy, and we'll fix it up, and we'll get it taken care of. Teddy Roosevelt said, I don't want to fix it up. I want to stop it. What you're doing is illegal. So he said, you're harming, the average man is being harmed by your monopoly. You're controlling prices. It's not fair. It's not legal. So the court found that Northern Securities was in violation of the law and busted it up, broke up that monopoly to create more competition. Competition's better for consumers, guys. It keeps prices lower. If there were only one cell phone company in the whole world, could they charge $500 a month for your cell phone? Yes. And would you pay it? If you want a cell phone, you will. But if there's 50 cell phone companies all competing for your money, it drives the prices lower, which is better for consumers. And also, you usually get a better product because they want to make a quality product to keep you as a customer. Make sense? Competition is good. That's what a monopoly is. It is a lack of competition. So this is not the only one that Teddy Roosevelt busts up, as you can see. He's swinging at a lot of things there laying on the ground. And he busts up over 40 monopolies while he's president. Over 40. Which is more than all of 3 of his predecessors combined. And he's confident he's doing the right thing. And he's using the federal government to do what he believed was right. Okay? This is kind of contrary to a lot of the beliefs of his predecessors in that, hands off. Let the business do its thing and let government do its thing. So, but he uses the government to affect the way Americans live their lives. All right? Now, the man himself he's wild. He's wild. He raced through every day with drinking coffee nonstop, and his coffee cup was like the size of a bucket. Like he drank over a gallon, like gallons of coffee a day. I have like 3 cups, and I'm done. You drinking a gallon of coffee? He answered almost every letter that was ever wrote to him as president, personally. Handwritten, okay? He would dictate to his stenographers, other people that would write, and he would just simply talk. And he himself wrote like 150,000 letters in his lifetime. 150,000. You guys probably don't even send that many emails in your entire life. Like, he's doing this handwritten stuff. Thomas Jefferson is known to be one of the greatest writing presidents because he hated public speaking. And he wrote about 22,000 letters in his life. But Teddy Roosevelt wrote 150,000. That's insane. He is the writingest president in American history. He also read at least 1 book a day. Sometimes 3 books. He could speed read. You guys know what speed reading is? Teddy Roosevelt is borderline genius. Okay? Maybe he is genius. But he could speed read. Not only could he speed read, but he could recall what he read years later by heart. It was genius. Yes, he's genius. He does not sleep much. Hence the coffee. Hence the coffee. He's a true Renaissance man. True Renaissance man. He ate a dozen eggs for breakfast every morning. Dozen eggs. He also dies very young.
Yeah, a gallon of coffee.
Gallon of coffee and a dozen eggs for breakfast every day. The man himself was a one-man gas bag. He never shut up, constantly talking. But he was always so interesting in what he was saying, people didn't seem to mind much. He loves hunting. He's a big game hunter. All right. He traveled the world to hunt exotic animals. Now, one day while he was president, he heard that this famous British big game hunter was in Washington. And he sent some people to go to summon him, to go get him, just so he wanted to meet him. Because it's like he was one of his heroes, a big game hunter. Okay, this guy killed all kind of exotic animals. So his people go out and they find him. And they bring him to the White House. And it's this big, strapping British guy. Okay. And, they take him into the Oval Office and they introduce him to the president. And then they close the door behind him. And it's just the president and this big British big game hunter. And then about an hour and a half later, the people like that took the big game hunter in, see the big game hunter emerge, and he's just like, he looks like he's exhausted, just absolutely just worn out. And they said, well, how did your meeting go? What did you say? He said, all I said was my name. Teddy Roosevelt talked the entire time. Didn't even let him speak, because that's just how he was. Okay, so that's major energy. Major energy. People loved Roosevelt because of his energy. He had a very infectious laugh. He had a laugh that, like, if you hear it, you would laugh too, just because it's one of those contagious kind of laughs. He was a large man. He loved playing games. He had small children while he was in the White House, and he played this one game. Like, he loved to play games. He played this one game called Single Stick, and he would invite his cabinet members to play. They would basically like wrap pillows all around them, and then take sticks and beat each other until somebody gave up. He would invite other heads of state who were visiting Washington to go skinny dipping in the Potomac River, as he did, because he was going to do it anyway. Hey, let's go skinny dipping. Go swim naked in the Potomac River. He boxed. He was a boxer as a young man, until one day he lost vision in his left eye after being hit in the face. So he stopped boxing and he took up jiu-jitsu. He played tennis every day, but there's no photos of that. I wonder why. He was good at it. He's very athletic. Tennis was seen as a upper class, wealthy person's game, and he's trying to appeal to everybody. That's him as a young man there. Pretty strapping, good-looking lad. Loved to ride horses. One day, he doesn't have any images of him playing tennis, but when a cameraman fell, like this is a retake, like he's out here riding his horse and the cameraman's trying to get a good picture of him, and the cameraman failed to capture him jumping over an obstacle on his horse, he did it again. He was pleased to do it again. So this is an actual image. Okay? This is at the White House. He's riding horses in the White House lawn. Okay? Imagine the president out riding a horse and swimming naked in the Potomac. No, but that's Teddy Roosevelt. Okay? While he was campaigning in New England, he gets involved in an accident. He was in a trolley accident. Like that was his carriage. Like a trolley runs over his carriage. It almost kills him. It does kill his bodyguard. And he's thrown about 30 feet in the air, and it breaks his leg really bad. And he spent several weeks in a wheelchair recuperating, but during that time he was faced with a really bad crisis. And that crisis was a coal mine labor strike. A coal mine labor strike. Coal mining was a business, and the rights of the coal miners were under the control of mine operators, the business, the company. And at this time, America was powered and energized, and it ran on anthracite coal. Much of it mined in the hills and mountains and valleys of Pennsylvania and West Virginia, which has the best anthracite coal in the nation, maybe the world. And it was an absolutely nightmarish job to be a coal miner at the turn of the century. 16-hour days with the constant threat of cave-ins and explosions from gas pockets. Boys as young as 10 would break big chunks into little chunks. Wages were low and hadn't been raised in more than 20 years. Sounds familiar? So, when this strike happened, the United Mine Workers of America, UMWA, called for 140,000 men to stop working. As a result of this, the price of coal went from $5 a ton to $30 a ton. This is like September, October, November. What's on the horizon? Winter. And a lot of Americans used coal to heat their homes. $30, that's $5 to $30, that is a significant increase. I mean, what is that? 7 times as much? So like my gas bill is like $200 a month. Imagine if it went from $200 a month to $1,400 a month. I can't make it. That's like my whole paycheck, more than my paycheck, just to heat my home. And that's what any American that used coal to heat their home, that's a problem. Okay, so winter was coming and homes would remain unheated. I'd just not heat my home. I'd just be cold. That's what I would be faced with. So Roosevelt's administration was sure to take the blame for this if that were to be the case. So he decides he's going to take action. Now, the thing is, where in the Constitution does it say he has the ability to regulate labor disputes? It does not. But he believes that he does. So he summons both sides. He calls for the United Mine Workers of America, the union, and he calls for the mine operators to come and have a meeting. And he asks both sides to talk it out. The mine owners are like, no way. I'm not even showing up, bro. We don't have to do that. Roosevelt says, you know what? You're exactly right. You don't have to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to nationalize the mining industry and use the United States Army to run the coal mines so that people's homes can be heated. That is bold. That is bold. Like he's going to take over their business. That is bold. Like they don't even want to regulate business. He's going to use government to take over a business. And he believes that he can do this because he's doing it what is right for the people. He says, no, it's not in the Constitution that I can do this, but the Constitution was made for the people and not the people for the Constitution. So, true a humanitarian move here. He's trying to look out for people that can't heat their homes. Imagine little cold babies. It's 14 degrees outside right now. Imagine you didn't have any heat in your house. Freezing. Okay? So, the mine owners, they cave in. They give in. So, they give in. And they agreed to follow some of the suggestions of a committee that would be determined to make some concessions for the miners. Ultimately, the miners agreed on a 10% pay raise and a 9-hour workday. So they got a raise, and they got their workday cut almost in half. From 16 to 9, that's a big difference. So the strike ended, and American homes would be heated, and the Republican Party, which he was a member of, would remain in power and maintain the majority in both houses. Thereby, Teddy Roosevelt becomes the first president to mediate a labor dispute. Another first. He's also the first to treat labor as a full partner in business. And he's the first to threaten federal troops on an American industry. All these very bold actions, and it all worked. It all worked. He carried a big stick, it worked. And he believed that, that's actually an old African proverb, speak softly and carry a big stick and you'll go far, is the actual quote. But he applies that when he's asked about, a lot of his actions. And, he himself is like the leader of the progressives. He loves the progressive movement. So how do you think he feels about America and having an empire? He wants it. He wants it because he's a progressive. And this is a look at the American empire around the year of 1903. Okay, so you see we have some territories, and you can see who belongs to what belongs to who. The United States had already annexed Hawaii and exiled Spain from the Western Hemisphere, really. Had control of Cuba, Puerto Rico, control over the Philippines. He was responsible for engaging in a bloody campaign to subjugate the Philippine people who wanted to be free from foreign rule. That happened under his watch. So not all great. Tens of thousands of people died just trying to gain that foothold in the Pacific. But he never concerned himself with any kind of criticism. He didn't listen to, he had very thick skin. And it had to do a lot with his beliefs. He believed that America was a civilized nation. But his definition of what made a nation civilized would be criticized today very heavily. Because his definition of what made a nation civilized is to be industrialized and to be mostly white. That was his definition of a civilized nation. Uncivilized nations, he saw as their responsibility was to provide the civilized nation with raw materials so that we can buy the raw material, so that the industrialized nation can buy raw materials and provide them with manufactured goods. He also believed that the uncivilized nations were not capable of governing themselves and therefore needed the civilized nation to have authority over them. And all of this, if it was not for the civilized nation in control, then there would be chaos. And it's up to the white industrialists of the world to keep order on the earth. So, and he even has his own map where he divvies up the world. He's like, okay, Britain, you can be responsible for India and Egypt and parts of Africa. Japan can control Korea and parts of the Yellow Sea. And the United States will take the Western Hemisphere. This is called the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. The Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, where he says it is the United States' responsibility as a civilized nation to keep order in the Western Hemisphere. Half of planet Earth belongs to America, and America is responsible for it. So, this is a good place to stop. Tomorrow we'll talk about his expansionist view and the Panama Canal. Your outlines are due tomorrow.